We talk a lot about being healthy and whole, but what exactly does it mean to be healthy and whole? It's important we get this right because if we don't, we might end up aiming for a target that isn't even possible to hit. And so in this episode, we dive into that topic with a man who's been an accomplished CEO, but who's also worked hard on himself as a husband and a father. We discuss things like why honesty and vulnerability are essential for healing and growth. My guest shares how forgiveness has been one of the most healing things for him. We discuss how to best measure how healthy you are, not just physically healthy, but your health overall as a person. We get into big topics like what's the point of life? And we talk about the 4 stages of growth that are required to love well. And finally, my guest offers a resource for leaders, pastors, priests, and seminarians. Stay with us. Welcome to the Restored Podcast, helping you heal and grow from the trauma of your parents' divorce, separation, or broken family so you can break the cycle. I'm your host, Joey Ponarelli. This is episode 129. We're so happy that so many of you have found the podcast helpful and even healing. We've heard a ton of great feedback. One listener said this: I have found your podcast episodes very healing, and I've passed on to friends and even seminarians and newly ordained priests. God continues to heal me of my broken childhood, and your podcast has been a big and safe place to go to receive it. Again, we're so happy to hear that it's been helpful and even healing. We do it for you. Today's episode is sponsored by Blackstone Films. In a recent survey by Adobe, 98% of Gen Z and 91% of millennials said that video is their top content choice. And that's not really surprising, but if you run a business or a ministry, are you taking advantage of that? Are you using video content, especially in your marketing? If you're like most of us, you know you need to create video content, but you don't know where to start. And it can honestly leave you feeling kind of overwhelmed to the point where you just give up on it altogether and you just go back to what you know, to what's comfortable, even if that's not what's best for your business or your ministry. That's where Blackstone Films can help you. They're a Catholic film and video production company that creates films that make you feel. They can create things like trailers, promo videos and commercials, social media videos, documentaries, fundraising videos, and courses. We actually filmed 2 video courses with them, which we're still giving away for free. And we had an excellent experience with them and their team. And you can see the value, you can see the quality for yourself on our website if you'd like. And so whatever you need, Blackstone is obsessed about helping you not just create video content, but create a clear win for your business or your ministry, such as fundraising for your ministry, selling a course, getting leads for your business, getting students to sign up for your school, promoting your event, and so much more. Blackstone has reached millions of people around the globe with their videos, and they can help you too. And so if you want to view past projects, view the services that they offer, or maybe even schedule a free initial consult with them, just go to blackstonefilms.co, not .com, blackstonefilms.co, or just click on the link in the show notes. My guest today is Matthew Rudolph. Matt is a husband and father of 4 children. In 2015, he joined the founders of Amazing Parish, Pat Lencioni, a famous business author, consultant, and John Martin, and spent the next 8 years leading coaching and content efforts for nearly 1,000 priests and bishops across the country. He most recently served as the executive director of Amazing Parish and recently stepped down for helping priests integrate human formation, leadership, and healing. In co-founding Chrism, which he'll tell you more about in the show, he hopes to equip even more clergy with practical skills and confidence so they can become the leaders and spiritual fathers that they are called to be. One disclaimer, we do talk about God and faith in this episode. If you don't believe in God, you're totally welcome here. Anyone who's been listening to the show for a while knows that we're not a strictly religious podcast. And so wherever you're at, you're totally welcome here. I'm glad you're here. If you don't believe in God, my challenge to you is just listen with an open mind. Even if you skip or take out the God parts, you're still going to benefit a lot from this episode. And with that, here's our chat. Matt, welcome to the show. So good to have you, man.
Thanks, Joey. Great to be here.
I'm excited to talk about this topic because, as we both know, we live in a very broken world. We live in a world that, one way to put it would be, it's very unhealthy. There's a lot of unhealthiness in our world on so many levels. And like me, you've had your own journey with brokenness and just kind of going through seasons of unhealthiness. Are there any particular moments in your life where you felt maybe the most broken or the most unhealthy?
Joey, that is a loaded question because the more that I learn about myself, the more I'm like, oh man, I have so much more work to do. But the 2 moments that really come to mind are really my first year of marriage. I had studied theology and philosophy and scripture, and I knew a lot of things about marriage and the beauty of marriage and how to live it out. I knew it in my head, and I even think I knew it in my heart, but I didn't actually practically know how to do it and how to give a gift of myself. I didn't perhaps have enough self-possession and self-awareness to be able to do that well. And so my first year of marriage, I was in marriage counseling. I was counseling for myself, and I needed help. I really needed help. And so my wife helped me realize my own brokenness. She didn't do anything wrong. It just, in being married, I realized that I didn't have things together in the ways that I thought that I did. And so, yeah, if anyone's listening and they're a year into marriage and like, man, did I fail? You did not fail. We just need help. And I needed help my first year of marriage. And the second time was really, and this is hard to admit and hard to say, but I was probably 5 years into being a father before I was honest with myself and could admit that I really didn't enjoy being a father. And it was a lot of my own brokenness and my lack of health and my lack of selflessness. And I wasn't able to give to my children in the ways that I wanted to. And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, like the father that I wanted to be and dreamt about being, and the wounds that I wanted to heal, like generationally, and like how I could give to my kids. I wasn't that father. That wasn't who I was. That's not how I was behaving. I didn't have the patience, the virtue, the love, the care for my children. I had a lot of other things going on in my heart and mind that were distracting me. So, I mean, and it sounds like, wow, what a failure. Matt, you're called to be married and to be a father. And those are the two things that I realized my brokenness and my lack of health and my lack of kind of integration were really those two big, big areas of my life.
Thank you for sharing so openly, so vulnerably. And man, I can relate on so many levels. I've totally seen that in my own life. Like the areas I think where we're most called to greatness are often the areas where we struggle the most, where we kind of realize our lack. And when I think of, movies or any sort of story, right? That's the heroic journey of like realizing like, hey, I want this thing. Like you said, I want to be this great father and husband. I want to like break the cycle of brokenness and wounds from the past, but I can't do it. Like
Yeah.
I really can't do it on my own. And especially when you come to that realization where it's like, no, like I thought I could do it on my own, but like I actually really can't do it on my own.
Yeah.
It's actually a really good and beautiful moment. And I think that's where we reach out for help. We get those guides, those mentors in our life who help us to kind of win the day and give us the plan we need and, challenge us and all that good stuff. And so, no, I think it's like, it's such a beautiful moment, but when you're in the midst of it, it's like, this is not beautiful. This is not fun. It's really grueling. And especially on the marriage front, I think, one of the things we see through the data about children of divorce is that that's the area of your life that's most impacted by your parents' divorce. It's the area of your life that you're typically going to struggle the most in is in your own marriage and your own, romantic relationships. And so, man, I felt that. At a deep level in my dating relationships, even in my friendships to an extent, but especially in marriage. It's like I almost feel, a bit incompetent. I felt a bit incompetent. Certainly have gained virtue and grown in those areas, but man, it's grueling. It's hard. And so I think it's really freeing and helpful. And one of the lessons I've learned from you over the years too, I've known you over the years, I've gotten to know you more lately, but I've been observing you from afar, and lately I've gotten to get more of a glimpse into how awesome you are. And I think like that power of just admitting like, yeah, I'm struggling here, I'm not where I want to be is so powerful. But talk about that for a second. Like even just that acknowledgement, like why is that so powerful? Why is that so helpful?
Joey, in my life, I don't know all the factors that played into this, but growing up and even, in high school and college was kind of a break from this. And then I kind of went back to it after college in many ways. But gosh, I guess the concise way of saying it is admitting your weaknesses to me was a sign of failure. It was a sign of I didn't plan well enough. I wasn't disciplined enough. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't virtuous enough. I wasn't holy enough. Fill in the blank. I wasn't blank enough. And admitting my weaknesses and brokenness meant that I wasn't enough. And I think that's a lie. That's a lie that I've been really working in my life to overcome and address and allow the Lord to speak truth over those lies. But those are lies that I believe for a very long time. And so admitting weakness for me showed great vulnerability to be hurt and to be weak. I think, and that's what I associated, admitting that with. I associated admitting my weaknesses with being weak, not good enough, not whatever enough. And Joey, it really is allowing the Lord into that brokenness. And there's actually so much more freedom now to not say I need to hide this and cover it, but to say, let me show you that I'm not fully together. And friends and family and wife, Danielle is my wife, like, this is broken and I need your help. And, you
Mm.
know, our path, our vocation is to get each other to heaven. And I need my wife. I need her to become the man that I'm called to be and to be the saint that I'm called to be. And so I think for a long time, I just was in self-preservation mode and I was too afraid to admit my weaknesses and the areas that I needed help in. And there's been a great freedom in more recent seasons of my life to name those things and to invite others into those areas of brokenness and weakness.
Beautiful. No, I love that. And I always admire people who are not, kind of addicted to secrecy or to controlling their own image, or at least they get to that point where they're able to be more vulnerable and open. I remember there was a couple recently who kind of spoke pretty openly about different struggles they've had and even mistakes they'd made as a couple in the past, like individually as a couple too. And I remember just like having so much admiration for them and thinking like, wow, you can be so honest and so open about like what you're going through and where you've messed up. There's something really great and beautiful. And I think that does lead to transformation. And on that note of transformation, I'm curious, like what transformation or transformations occurred in your life? I know some are ongoing and that's really beautiful, that have kind of led you from maybe that place of struggle to a better spot to where you are today.
Gosh, I'm a work in progress, Joey. So the other side of transformation, I wouldn't say I'm there, but I think the Lord is transforming parts of my heart and parts of who I am. And, going to counseling was really helpful for me. And what it did is it allowed me to start seeing things as they were and to no longer have my blinders up or my perceptions of things or even my self-preservation up. Like it allowed me to start being honest and vulnerable and seeing things as they were. So that was a huge step of transformation. Instead of seeing myself as completely weak or not good enough or not whatever enough, I started to see, gosh, there's actually patterns in my life. There's people in my life. There's memories in my life that are affecting me and my behavior. And no wonder it's hard for me to, keep journeying uphill and climbing a mountain without any breaks. And so I think just that counseling allowed me to see things a little more for what they were. It doesn't take away my part. It doesn't take away, my culpability in things, but it did allow me to see things more fully. So that allowed me to actually start working on things and working at the root of things. And so I really was able to start seeing my brokenness, not just through Matthew, the failure, but through like a fuller story and a fuller picture of my context. And I started to see gaps in my formation. I even started to see gaps in my formation and upbringing as a child and could understand, oh, this is connected to that. That makes a lot of sense. And so that was really transformative for me. It allowed me to start forgiving myself. It allowed me to start forgiving others. And I think forgiveness has honestly been the biggest power of transformation in my life. I've needed a ton of forgiveness from others. And, just recently, I was at the National Eucharistic Congress and, was praying the Friday reflection. The theme was all about mercy and repentance, right? And that evening, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like my relationship with Jesus was hindered because I've not forgiven someone in my life. And there were actually multiple people that came to mind that I needed to forgive and ask forgiveness from as well. And so I think that's been a huge transformation in my life, is not being so proud and being able to admit that I've failed and I've hurt others in my life and that I need their forgiveness, and then to be very liberal about my forgiveness to those who have hurt me. And that has brought about just a change interiorly for me, a receptivity and openness, just a greater capacity to love. And it goes both ways. I've needed to be forgiven and I've needed to forgive others. So it's gone both ways and it's increased this capacity. So that's been the biggest transformation in my life. But I would also say just awareness of my wounds and the things in my life. Bob Schutz will talk about type A trauma and type B trauma. One is, something terrible has been done to you, and the other is something was missing. And I think for me, as I reflect on my own life, and, I think people listening to this, Joey, certainly can identify with trauma in their life. You look back, and when you see the full picture of your life and the things that have happened to you or the things that haven't happened to you, it allows you to see a fuller narrative and a fuller picture. And for me, it allows me to have more mercy and compassion towards myself and mercy and compassion towards others. And so that's been a huge that self-awareness and just allowing the Lord has been able to move in those places because I've just had more room after that self-reflection and that greater awareness.
So good. And it sounds like it's increased your capacity to just love overall. Like you're more free to love, which we'll get to a little bit later, which I think is just so good and beautiful. I definitely in my life have seen that, seeking God's forgiveness is hard. Seeking other people's forgiveness is hard, but the hardest by far is like forgiving yourself. There's something about that I think we just want to hold on to. And I think on a lot of levels, I know in my own story, especially going back to the, different mistakes I've made, I think there's part of myself that kind of hates the other part of myself, where it's like, you idiot, like, why did you, do that stuff? Like now I can see more clearly, of course, but in the moment I was in so much pain and just, obviously acting in a way that's not good. And so I think, yeah, it's really important that we, take that compassionate, that merciful approach to ourselves, not just to other people and not just like going to God asking for forgiveness. So it sounds so helpful. I wanted to ask you though, when it comes to forgiveness, for some people it can be kind of this elusive thing. Is there some sort of process or thought or points that you kind of anchor on to when it comes to both giving forgiveness to people who've hurt you and also seeking forgiveness from people maybe that you've hurt?
I've been really moved just by Jesus and how he commands us to forgive. And in this journey of learning how to forgive more and more, I'm becoming more and more aware of just how this theme is constant in his message. Every time we pray the Our Father, for example, do we realize that we are asking him to forgive us? I'm asking to be forgiven in the same way that I forgive others. That's literally what I'm praying. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So every time we pray the Our Father, which is at every Mass, multiple times if we say the Rosary, multiple times if we say the Divine Mercy Chaplet, like the prayers of our Catholic life, or for non-Catholics, we say the Our Father as well, as Protestants. So, this is a prayer given to us by Jesus, and, we are commanded to forgive, and we are asking in that prayer that we be forgiven the same way that we forgive others. I've been very moved by that and very challenged by that, right? Yeah. To even look at my heart and say, do I want to forgive certain things and not other things that I want to still hold on to? Or are there things that I'm holding on to and not allowing the Lord to really speak the truth of forgiveness over those things in my own life? And so, I think just really praying through that line in the Our Father has been really powerful for me. In addition, there's another scripture that really convicts me of this, and Jesus talks about, forgiveness, and with the measure you use to forgive, you will be forgiven, right? Thinking about that measure. And
wow.
I don't know about you, but I have been one to calculate the cost. Oftentimes, like, to forgive someone means that I'm actually releasing them of the debt or of what's actually just, what's maybe even owed to me. I'm like releasing that. I'm forgiving them. Like that's what mercy is. It's to receive something you don't deserve. And right, when we show mercy and forgiveness to someone, we're releasing them of that debt. And like the measure with which I forgive is the same measure with which I will be forgiven. Like, man, that convicts me to want to forgive more and more wholly and more completely, and not even hold on to the things that, I think I could quickly say, oh yeah, I forgive you. Or, sometimes I'll just quickly say, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, no, if I have wronged someone, I need to take ownership for that and truly ask for forgiveness. And when someone asks for forgiveness from me, I need to truly offer that in the same way that I hope that our Lord forgives me of my sins on my judgment day.
Beautiful. That's a really strong point, that it's not enough to just say the words. Like, obviously the words are part of it. Meaning the words is more important though, and really like putting your heart behind it. And I know it's kind of, depending on how someone hurt you and how serious it was, it can be this ongoing thing. It's not just like a one and done thing as well. So I think all those are like really important points that you hit on. And we had Father John Burns on in an episode. We'll link to that. I can't remember the exact episode number, but we'll link to it. So if you guys want to hear more about forgiveness and like his whole process of forgiveness, that episode is awesome. And one of the things I learned from him, and I'm hearing you say too, is there's this important component of forgiveness to be just like moved by the misery of the the other or ourselves, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so there's this important component, especially when we're like challenged to forgive. We need to be moved by their misery. We need to see them in their humanity, not just in the way that they harmed us. And I know for a lot of people listening right now, especially who've, gone through their parents' divorce or their family, just really dysfunctional, they might harbor a lot of anger, a lot of even hate towards their parents. And like the idea of forgiving them is just like almost impossible. What would you say to them in that situation? If they do feel kind of convicted by this, but they feel a little bit stuck.
Yeah, it helps me. I was talking with a friend recently, and he reminded me of the stages of forgiveness. And so when you've been hurt and wronged, right, you lose trust, right? There's a broken part of your relationship. And forgiveness is not forgetting, right? And we were just talking about how, gosh, where are you at in your stage of forgiveness with this circumstance or this person? And, he was sharing with me that forgiveness is stage one. Stage two is rebuilding, it's reconciliation, like to reconcile. And stage three is to begin trusting again. That, I don't know whose model that is. I can't claim that. And I don't think my friend can either. I think it's someone else's model, but that really resonated with me. There's a freedom. I can be more liberal with my forgiveness if I'm not saying, let's pretend it's all better now and we're reconciled and back at square one and pretending like nothing happened. That's not what forgiveness is, right? But forgiveness is truly like a release of the burden of that sin, of that pain that someone caused you. And I'm forgiving you. I'm choosing to forgive you just as Jesus forgave on the cross. That doesn't mean that like when he forgave that like his wounds were immediately transformed. He was still in pain and he was still bleeding on the cross. Like that forgiveness didn't fix everything, but he still chose to forgive. And I think that's like to live in that is okay. You can still choose to forgive even if the pain is raw. And that doesn't mean that you've moved into reconciliation or fully trusting and beginning again with someone. But Jesus forgave on the cross when his pain was real and it was present. It wasn't in the past. And he still forgave.
No, beautiful and inspiring. And I love the stages idea, especially if there's maybe a person who it would be very bad idea to have some sort of reconciliation. Like there's obviously that component of it too, if they would be like unsafe or very toxic, unhealthy to such a level where you can't be in that situation. So yeah, that's really, really helpful.
And Joey, I might say this too. Just one more thought came to mind. I think we're all called to forgive, like in person and with our words. But if you can begin, if you're really struggling, there's a painful relationship or you've been really hurt in your life, you can start by desiring to forgive and beginning that in your own heart. Like, Lord, I want to forgive this person. Lord, I want to get to a place of forgiveness. And that forgiveness can begin just in the silence of your heart and that wrestling and asking the Lord to move, if you're not ready to actually go to that person and offer forgiveness. So I think there's a process. And if that's where you're at, just pray for the desire to want to forgive and wrestle with the Lord in that.
So good. And the benefits are there. Like if you've never experienced it, once you really go through that process of forgiving someone who's hurt you, you literally won't realize like, wow, I did not realize I was carrying around this like boulder on my back that's just been weighing me down on so many levels. And when you forgive them, it's like, there's so much freedom there. There can be, at least if it's genuine. And, I've experienced that myself, which is, I hope everyone listening can go through that. I know it's not easy, but like Matt, I hear you saying, just take the small steps.
Yeah.
And, challenge yourself to kind of go outside your comfort zone when the time is right. But anything else you'd add before we move on?
You mentioned the word freedom, and I think that's very true when we forgive others, but also if we have harmed others, there's tremendous freedom in being forgiven. And I'll share this, Joey. I've asked for forgiveness from people before that I still felt like there was a debt owed, if you will. Like there was unresolved things there. It was just for me to still feel the way that I did in a circumstance. But me admitting my part and asking forgiveness and expressing sorrow for my part in that circumstance. And it was not conditional on the other person apologizing to me, right? So often if I'm going to apologize and I'm owed an apology as well, I want the other person to do that. And I've been really praying to be free from whatever the other side is, whatever the outcome is, that I still am going to own my part. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to ask for forgiveness. And I've been so much freer as a result, even if that person didn't apologize to me and own up to their part that hurt me. And so I just want to encourage you, like there's freedom, such a freedom in forgiveness. And the context doesn't have to be like, oh yeah, we're totally on the same page about how this is going to look. Like, you can still offer that to someone else or ask for it of yourself even before that other person is ready to take their step forward. So
That's such an
yeah,
That's such an important point. No, please keep going. I don't mean to jump in there. I can't emphasize this enough, because from what we're hearing from a lot of the young people that we're walking with is, they maybe like one or both of their parents are in that spot where they've like made some decisions or done some things that have really hurt their kids, and they might be oblivious to it. Or just like lack such awareness that it's like, wow, like this hurt me so bad. And mom or dad don't even realize it.
they have no clue.
Yeah, or if they do, they're just like, for one reason or another, they haven't done anything about it, and that could be like such a heavy burden. So I like this idea that it can be this one way thing, which I think ultimately, if there's could be reconciliation, that's the goal, but at least starting with yourself, because that's the only person you could control.
Yeah. And Joey, I think just going back to Jesus, right? He says on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, right? Maybe they did, like, what a generous and unmerited request of the Father. Like, they know that they're killing him and they're torturing him and he's bleeding and dying on the cross, right?
Suffocating, literally, yeah.
Yes, like they can see that this man is suffering to a great degree, and he still says, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. And I do think that, gosh, what a challenge it is to show that kind of mercy to people. And what I'm not saying is that people don't need to take responsibility for the pain that they've caused others, but that may not always come before you express forgiveness. The order doesn't have to be that way. So anyways, I'm inspired by Jesus and want to be more like him in the way he forgave even when he was in the pain on the cross.
Truly heroic. And on that note, I think it's so important. We talk a lot about health and wholeness and all these terms that people are familiar with, but I don't think we slow down to really define our terms. And so I'd love to kind of go there now with you. And again, thank you so much for sharing so much, and your insights are always just so brilliant. That's why I wanted to talk with you about this. So I'm curious, let's dive into this. Let's slow this around a bit. Like, what's the first thing that comes in mind when you think of a healthy or whole person?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, ironically, is what it's not.
Right.
Because I think for so long, I've been striving for something that's not whole or healthy.
Yeah.
And so, I think about something that is whole is something that is not divided. It's not separated. It's united. It's one. It's as it was intended to be. And I think about, for the human person, being whole is looking at everything, all the aspects that God has created you with, right? I have a body. He's given me a body. He's given me a mind. He's given me a soul. He's given me a heart, right? And it's when those things are connected and in harmony with one another, that's what it is to be whole. And I think so much of life, because of original sin, right? Adam and Eve, before the first sin, were whole, right? Their bodies, their minds, their hearts, their desires matched what they did. Like, there was not a disintegration of these things. And it wasn't until that sin and that lie from the enemy that they started to believe that disintegration started to happen. They were no longer whole. They were broken. There was brokenness in their desires, in their relationships, in their bodies, in the world, right? There was pain, there was suffering, there was work, right? So I think wholeness is the unity and the harmony of those aspects with which God has created us. Body, mind, soul, like all of those things being in harmony with one another.
That's so good. It's almost like the parts aren't at war with each other. They're all moving, working together, moving in one direction. And that's what I hear you saying about, going to the biblical story of Adam and Eve. Like it's not like their desires were telling them to do one thing and their mind was telling them, no, that's not good, do this other thing. It was like, no, their desires wanted the good thing and their mind was like, yeah, do the good thing.
Yeah.
That would be nice to experience.
Yeah. Well, it's like, Joey, we talked about like working on virtues, like, and as men, like we're called to work on virtues. What if like it wasn't work to be virtuous, right? I think that's Adam and Eve, just their desires so fully like integrated with what was good for them. They didn't have to think about, I need to do the virtuous thing right now, right? It just, that was in alignment, right? And I'm like, gosh, what would that be like? But I think that's what the journey of the lifelong journey towards wholeness looks like. And for us, it takes like virtue building. It takes flexing muscles. It takes prayer and emptying ourselves to really make space for like that virtue to happen. But I think it's getting to that original place, right? That's what heaven will be like, where our bodies, our mind, everything is restored, everything is made new and as it should be.
That's so good. So yeah, I guess disintegration, like you said, would be kind of the division of the parts, kind of warring against each other, wanting different things. Maybe some parts of you wanting good things, other parts of you wanting bad things, like your intellect typically wanting the good, and then there maybe desires wanting the bad. And then integration would be the opposite of what we're saying, which is like everything's kind of in alignment. So just trying to make sure I understand everything on that
Yeah.
front. And I think, yeah, anything else to add before I move on?
No, Joey, I appreciate this about you. I've really appreciated our growing friendship as well. Joey is a man that is very good at being concise and getting to the point, and I am not. So I appreciate you driving the point home to really make a clear point. I really, really love that about you.
Oh, thank you. No, I think we make a good team for sure. I think there is something about like looking at what it's not, to in order to define like health and wholeness, because I think we look around us and we definitely see many examples of what it's not. And I want to go into that in a moment. But another question, I guess, is like, can health and wholeness be obtained, or is it more of an infinite goal that we're kind of always like working on, like fitness?
I don't know the answer to that, but here are my thoughts.
I don't
I think I don't think we will be whole, completely whole, until we are one with God in heaven. I don't think that that's possible. And maybe it is possible if you die a living saint and you've totally like been cleansed of the disintegration in your life, right? So maybe I would go back on that if there's like, okay, a living saint. Like, was Mother Teresa whole? I mean, I want to believe she was pretty darn close to it, if not there. But I
Yeah.
think what my response would be, Joey, I think it's more like the same question of holiness. So, Joey, are you holy? Right? I hope that you would say yes. I would say yes. But are you done becoming holy?
Yeah.
Are you done with your path of holiness and your journey towards holiness? Absolutely not. Like,
No.
so for me, am I holy? Gosh, I hope so. Am I as holy as I need to be? No. But so similarly, I think, am I whole? I'm a lot more whole than I was a year ago or 10 years ago, but I'm not done becoming whole, if that makes sense. So I think it's more of a journey. It's a spectrum. Kind of sounds like a weird word to use, but in many ways, I think it is. I'm far more healthy and holy, and like whole, not holy as in, close to God, but whole, WHOLE. I'm more whole than I was a decade ago, and I'm really grateful for that. So I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm tracking with you. It's bringing up a lot of kind of thoughts and questions. One idea, I know we're talking about like wholeness, holiness, and health. I kind of throwing these terms around. I almost think of like holiness as like, it sounds like we're all mirrors, and the more clear the reflection of Jesus is, that's like the level of your holiness. I like to think of it that way. And then I guess health would be maybe a little bit, it's certainly tied in with all that, but maybe a little bit more removed in that, like maybe there's this like ideal of the human person, and Christians, Catholics would say that's Jesus, right? We would say that. But that's kind of like what we're striving towards. Like how accurately do we reflect what it means to be human, like at the deepest level? And so it brings up the question of like, well, it's a big question. Like, why are we here? Like, what's the whole point of all this? Because if we just measure like health and wholeness on like a secular materialistic level, we would probably look at people's looks. We'd look at their fitness, we'd look at their like physical health. We wouldn't really go below the surface and think of this whole like kind of spiritual realm as well. So I think our definition, like you said well before, needs to be very holistic. It needs to include all the aspects of the human person. You mentioned the soul, the body, the heart, the mind, which I love. So I think there's something to all of that. I know I'm kind of going down different rabbit holes here, but I think that there's something to that. And so to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, I think the whole purpose of life is to love. And so I think the best measure of maybe health and wholeness is like your capacity to love. Like the greater your capacity to love, the more free you are, the more healthy, the more whole you are. If there's any inhibitions, if there's any barriers that are holding you back, that's just one way, in my opinion, to measure your health and wholeness. And I guess another way to measure freedom too. So any thoughts on any of that?
Gosh, I love both of those words. You just named like two of my favorite words, freedom and love. And then you put those together, freedom to love. So I can't help but think of John Paul II, who talks about freedom, right? Freedom is not, I can do whatever I want. It's the freedom to do what I ought, right?
Mm.
And right, freedom to love, that really reflects a freedom to love because we were made to love. So
The-
can't help but reference JP2 because I think he got this so well. I think he lived integration so well, right? You look at body, mind, soul, like this man was living it all, right? He's skiing and glorifying God with his body, but he's also going deep with the Lord intellectually and writing deep truths of our faith. And he had this huge heart, this great capacity to love, right? Anyone, I just remember being a kid in his presence, I felt loved by him, right?
Mm.
I just felt loved by the man. He had such a capacity to love. And so I think you're really onto something that, the measure is your capacity to love, your freedom to give of yourself in love. But something you mentioned earlier just is a similar temptation that I have to measure these things more on the externals. I think we're more
Mm.
comfortable with the externals, right?
Yeah.
What's a healthy person look like? Well, they'd be in good shape and they would be well put together and all of those things. But I think too often today and in society, we focus on those exteriors far too much than we do on the interior health, right? The health or the wholeness of the heart and the mind, the soul. And right, think about just social media. How often, Joey, do we just post the good things that
Yeah.
exteriorly, right? We appear this way. And, I've some of the most fit people that I've ever known are some of the most broken when you actually get to know them. But there's almost this like, gosh, I feel a sense of control, or I feel like a sense of accomplishment, or I'm getting somewhere if I've mastered this one part of my life. But it's just that one part, right? It's the physical body, and that's only one part of the whole person, right? So I think it
Yeah.
can be really, it's disintegrated if we only focus on that.
Mm.
And I think
Mhm.
Jesus even talks about this with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he talks about, the cup, right? And the cleansing, if we only cleanse the exterior, what people see, he's far more interested on the interior. And so I think that's actually a really tough thing. What I'm not saying is like, let's dismiss the body, because I
Mm.
think the body really does matter. But I think it's easier for us to only focus on that and not focus on the interior things. And Jesus really warns against that.
It's really good.
Yeah. And I think too, integration, I've thought a lot about this recently. These are going to be like unfiltered thoughts and words, but just how integration is rooted in the word integrity, right? Even in preparation for this podcast, Joey, I was like, how would you simply define integrity? Because I could use a lot of words, but what is integrity? So it's the state of being whole and undivided is one definition that I saw. So the state of being whole and undivided. And what is it to have an undivided heart and mind and will and desires, right? Like when those things are aligned, like, gosh, that's integrity versus, even Paul talks about this. And I find so much support from Paul. Like he was a saint, transformed his life, but still after following the Lord struggled with sins of the flesh and struggled like, why do I do the things I don't want to do? Why is my greatest desires not aligning with my like earthly and like worldly and carnal desires, right? It's because he's not yet whole, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's, if St. Paul could struggle with that and he was much closer to Jesus than I was, like I find a lot of consolation in saying, okay, why do I do the things I don't want to do? And why do I not do the things that I want to do? Well, because I'm not whole yet. I'm not fully integrated. And that's what I need, more healing in my life to get there. So, but I think going back to what you said, Joey, like that freedom to love, I really do think if there's a measurement, if there's a KPI to all of this, that's it. Like, am I free to give of myself? And I also think we have to be careful, though. Some people can get busy being Marthas and, right, doing. I'm giving of myself almost to cover up the things that I don't like, or the areas that do need healing. So it truly
Mm.
is a freedom to love and fully give of yourself, not just to be doing things to contribute to make other people's lives better, to show love and care for others, but it's to love is like freedom to love, like wholly, like
Mm.
entirely, not just out of I really ought to be doing something out of love for someone else, right? I think that's an
Mm.
important distinction. Like Martha and Mary, that's a tension in me sometimes, is the doer or the beer. And I think, Mary was able to just be at the feet of Jesus, and that was loving just as much as Martha's doing. And
Mm.
so both are really important.
Yeah, no, I follow you there. So many good things. One point you made about kind of our culture, it's really interesting to look around and see like what we value, like what we almost like, you might be able to say like worship. And it really is things like wealth, fitness, quote unquote success in the form of like, popularity or business or something like that. We worship celebrities on some level too. And we worship youth in our culture in particular. And so it's really interesting to see like that's kind of what we would maybe define as a secular culture as like health and wholeness or like the goal. But it's very different than what we're saying. Not to say those things aren't a component of it, sure, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not like to the level that I think our culture overemphasizes, and probably overemphasizes because there's like not much depth below it. Like there's not that, like you said, the interior part, like the spiritual component and the deep like focus on love and doing good and all that. So I think that that's really important to highlight that we're very much so diverting from that in our definition. And the other thing I thought of too is I think love is like the pinnacle of all the virtues, right? And so it's the greatest of all the virtues. So I guess another way we could say what we're saying is like the greatest measure of health is virtue. And
Mm.
so that's, I think, a really important thing to maybe get into a little bit in some of the time we have left. Like to someone who's maybe hearing that word and thinking like, yeah, I kind of know what that is, but couldn't really define it. Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Like what is a definition of virtue? And yeah, let's dive in there.
Gosh, these definitions. I'm not good at this, Joey. This requires like a concise answer, but
Yeah, no.
um,
In Matt's way, like, how would you define like virtue if someone came up to you and like, what's virtue?
yeah, I think so. I've been doing a lot of work with priests and seminarians
Hmm.
around just integration. And, there's a lot of spiritual realities for priests and seminarians, specifically a priest, right? You're a spiritual father, but you're also, right? You're not just called to give sacramentally to people, you're called to give of your whole self, right? It's not that different actually from you and I in our fatherhood, right? We pour ourselves out and we give of ourselves, and right, we get woken up in the middle of the night. And this morning, my son, was crying, and my wife was like, he's awake. And I was like, oh, he sure is, isn't he? And right, the part of me that desires to love and to give of myself after the second time got up and got him so that my wife could sleep in. But I guess,
Wow.
I guess virtue, it's so easy for me to describe what virtue isn't. It's harder for me to describe what virtue is. Like virtue, I think is like this, it gives you this like self-possession so that you can give of yourself, right? And um virtue, there's so many virtues. Jesus was the most virtuous man, so it really points back to how did Jesus live and how did these virtues connect and integrate. Because you know I could say, well, the virtue of prudence is this, but sometimes a moment calls for the virtue of courage, right? And
Mm.
it's actually, these things are not in opposition, they're integrated, right? So similarly, like I think we're talking a lot about integration, how these things are connected. I could, out of prudence, say, well, gosh, I didn't get much sleep last night, so my wife should get up with the baby so that I can be well rested and do well at work and give my full self there. But what about charity, right? What about love? The greatest of these is love. And so I need to get up and out of love, be motivated to show my wife that. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Joey, is that lack of virtue, I think, is a person who is just very of the world. You're formed by the world. You value the things of the world. And virtue allows me to not be that worldly person. It allows me to look at where I'm going and to choose the good over my own desires, to
Mhm.
choose something greater than my own desires. So a lack of virtue is I do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And I'm actually not happy at the end of that, right? If it's choosing sin or pleasure or eating or drinking or whatever it is, that lack of virtue doesn't actually make me happy and whole. It's virtue that makes me happy and whole. It's the
Mm.
orienting of myself towards higher goods, towards the greatest goods. And that's what I think virtue is all about.
Oh, I love that. And it makes so much sense. And that, what I hear you describing as vice is what, Catholic Christian culture would call sin and in many ways. And yeah, I agree. It like promises a lot it seems like being selfish would be like a better way to live in some ways. It's like only worrying about yourself and having whatever you want. It's like, that sounds kind of great. And then you live it and
Hmm.
you do it. And it's like, wow, this is miserable and very empty. And like, this is not, it doesn't deliver what it promises. I think that's like an earmark of vice. It's like, it tricks you. It tricks you. It fools
Yeah.
you. Whereas virtue, on the other hand, often is just hard. And especially at the beginning, it's just difficult. And then once you attain a virtue or integrate it into your character, there's just like this level of mastery and freedom, and you actually experience the satisfaction, the joy, and the peace that you long for. Not to add like this level of utopia or euphoria, but at a level that's like, wow, okay, this is like what I was made for. This is the life that I want to live. And so one of the things I was thinking back to is like the way the Greeks thought about virtue. I'm going to butcher this, but was it arete, where they said it's like virtue is essentially like human excellence, where it's
Mm.
like this, it's like take a human and everything a human should be, and if they're full, like if they have virtue, then they're like thriving in human excellence. Not just excellent at some function, like they're great at golf or they're great at math or something like that. They're great at business. It's like, no, they actually are like they're great at being human. And there's something about that that's just so good. And so I remember too, the Greeks defined virtue as the habitual disposition to do the good, if I'm remembering that right. Habitual disposition to do the good. And so in that, there's kind of like two components that I've always thought of. One is there's obviously the habit part. It's like good habits, those are virtues. And then that kind of inclination, that disposition, that almost like leaning towards like what is good is another component of it. So it's like it has to do with your heart, not just your actions too. And so I think those things for me have always been helpful, in addition to everything you said, which I think was so well said. And, ultimately they, just bring about this, like, again, mastery in life that lead to freedom. And on that note, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say. I remember you and I talking a bit about that whole, if love is the point of life, if the greatest of the virtues is love, and that's like what we're trying to orient our life around, that there's so much like joy and freedom and happiness to be found in giving yourself away, and, in a healthy way, then we really need to work up to that point. But what precedes that point, that self-gift, is really self-possession. Like we need to have that mastery over ourselves, as we've talked about. So that's like one, level below it. And then another level below that is we need self-awareness, right? We need to kind of learn about ourselves and be able to kind of know how we operate in different situations with different people, like when we're our wounds and triggers and different things like that, or maybe just blind spots and deficiencies and all that. And then one level below that would be just self-knowledge. So I'll kind of explain that again. So self-knowledge is the starting point. And that's what you talked about. That's what I heard you saying earlier when you talked about going to therapy. You just like learn more about yourself, almost as if you were getting to know another person. It's like, oh, I'm learning parts about myself that I didn't really know before. I didn't fully understand. I'm getting insight into maybe blind spots, things like that. So that self-knowledge then leads to self-awareness. Now I can take that knowledge, I can go out into the world, I can be in relationship with other people, and I know like, oh, in this situation, I might tend towards anger, or I might tend towards, self-pity or pride or arrogance, whatever, any of the vices. And so I know I can course correct. I can act in a way that's maybe different than my inclination, because like you said, we live in this broken world and we want to do things that maybe aren't good for us. And so then that self-awareness leads us to, like, once we get good at that, we have this self-possession. And then from self-possession, we are able to make a gift of ourselves. Like we're free. And so not to kind of circle around that too much, but I think it's been so helpful for me, and something obviously I'm still working on. But I think that model is really freeing and helpful. And I think we're getting at the heart of like what it means to be healthy and whole.
Yeah, Joe, I think it's so important to just understand why we do the things that we do, and even to be curious about why. I think that's also been a really helpful piece for me, is any of my weaknesses I associated with poor character or lack of virtue. And some of that's probably true. But some of it is also that I've been given a certain personality and I grew up in a certain home, and I have my own experiences of life, good and bad, pain that I've experienced and how I've responded to that, as, even as early as a child. And I think that if we want to make a self-gift of ourselves, which I know that everyone desires that, ultimately we all desire that, it's impossible to do that unless we've worked backwards to understand what is actually going on inside of us, right? And that's it. It's so important that we go in that order. And it's not a neat order every time, for me at least. It's, gosh, I want to be more generous. I want to love better. I want to give of myself more. And it's like, well, I just can't right now. Okay,
Yeah.
why? Like, what's going on? And if I work backwards, it's like, yeah, I'm still I'm still selfish. There's a childhood Matt that is still wanting to be whole and is still broken. And, unless the Lord can just totally supply the grace, which he can, even if we haven't gone through this whole process of becoming whole and healing, he can provide grace so that we can skip those other steps and give a gift of ourselves. So I do think that's the beauty of this. We need to do the work. We need to grow in our self-awareness and self-mastery so that we can give a gift of ourselves. But sometimes we do just need to pray for the grace and the virtue, the supernatural virtue to do heroic things even when our human limitations get in the way. I think that grace can cover a lot of our weaknesses.
No, I love that. That's great advice. And I was thinking too, when you were speaking, how, what you're saying, that at least in my life, and I've seen this in a lot of my friends' lives, of the people that I lead, when we're the most broken, I think that's when we're most susceptible to, or most tempted to, or most vulnerable to vice, right? Because usually we're in pain when we're broken, when we don't feel whole, when we're in an unhealthy spot, and then we go towards vice because it promises something that it doesn't deliver. It's a drug in a sense that it helps us to numb that pain. And then that, in ways injures us more. It does more harm. It wounds us more. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of go back to, that, I'm really broken. And then there's this vicious cycle between brokenness and vice, brokenness and vice, brokenness and vice. I see it all the time. And so I think in order to, stop the vice, some people just kind of say, well, you just need to be strong and be virtuous and just kind of put on a good front and just kind of power through it. And there's maybe some level of merit to that. We do need to have strength, and we can't, just expect that if we think long and hard enough about our past, that everything's going to be perfect and we're going to be able to, finally love people and be virtuous. There's some to taking action. I'm not diminishing that. But what I've seen so often is people just neglect the whole brokenness and untreated trauma component of it. And I know you see this a lot in your work too.
Yeah.
And so, I love any thoughts or comments on this whole vicious cycle between brokenness and sin, brokenness and vice that you're observing in your own life and in the priests and people that you work with.
Yeah. I mean, Joey, it's so prevalent in my own life, and, the desire for virtue, and then the lack of virtue and the lack of, you know what I mean? It's Paul, I totally relate to you, St. Paul. But I think for so many years of my life, I relied on my own strength, and I relied on self-sufficiency because of my woundedness, because of pain I've experienced in my life, that it was a lot easier for me to say, well, gosh, to avoid that pain altogether, I'm going to be independent. I'm going to be self-sufficient. I'm not going to rely on other people. I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm not going to admit my weaknesses, right? Yeah. That caused me more pain. At least I thought it did. And it's been so freeing to understand my own woundedness. And another conversation, Joey, could be about just, the wounds that Bob Schutz will talk about. And, there's seven wounds that are very prevalent, and there's more wounds than that, but, 7 common wounds, and just naming those and understanding that those exist. And then knowing that when we've experienced pain in our lives, wounds I would say are synonymous with pain in many ways, right? If I've experienced a pain in my life, I'm wounded by that. And if that wound doesn't get healed quickly, I start to believe things about that pain, right? If I continue to feel that pain, the devil totally sees our vulnerability and starts speaking lies to us. And we start believing things that are not true about ourselves, about the world, about others, about the person that causes that pain, about, whatever. And then over time, we build vows, false vows that, I will never be vulnerable again. I will never allow myself to be hurt in this way. I will never, whatever. Fill in the gap with whatever you need to vow so that you're not hurt again. And for me, Joey, quite honestly, I've had so much more freedom in my journey in being able to name those wounds and accept that I'm wounded and that I'm in pain or have been in pain in my life, which sounds weak and vulnerable to say, but it's true. Even if the pain is still present. And in naming that wound, it has allowed me so much more quickly to build virtue and to invite the Lord's healing into it, versus I need to heal myself. I need to self-preserve. I need to be independent. I don't want to need others. I don't even want to need God, in this area of my life. And so in the recognition of and naming certain wounds has just brought in so much more grace and like growth in virtue has just been much faster than me building virtue on my own.
Love that. Speaking of growth and virtue, I know you work with a lot of business owners, leaders, priests, bishops, even people in ministry, wherever, to do you coach them? You have extensive experience as a CEO and you offer that sort of executive coaching and more. So if you would tell us about the work that you do, what you offer, and how people can find you online.
Yeah. So Joey, I've been formed a lot by Pat Lencioni and his leadership principles and organizational health principles. And I offer that to for-profit leaders, as well as nonprofit leaders, and particularly to priests and bishops and seminarians. So I have one business that does work in pouring into leaders, help building up their confidence in who they are as a leader. A lot of that self-awareness, self-mastery, like it's a lot of the things we've been talking about today, and then how that affects an organization when you lead a team and when you lead an organization and a culture. So that's one of the projects I'm working on. And then the second is called Chrism, and it's a project specifically for priests, bishops, and seminarians to provide an integrated approach to ongoing formation. And what I've learned, Joey, is that leadership is just one piece of the puzzle. And for a lot of my life, the last 6 or 8 years, I was like, yeah, leadership is the key. Leadership is the key. And it's definitely a gap in the formation for priests. I definitely still see it as a gap. But what I found is that so many priests, if they're not growing in leadership and the principle is true and even they're convicted of that principle, but they're not actually able to embrace it and own it and implement it, it's because there's something else going on under the surface. And so a lot of the work that I'm doing now is very integrated. It's recognizing our woundedness or our spiritual needs and how that affects us humanly and how that affects us as leaders. And so it's been really beautiful to just look at the whole man. And if God is calling you to the priesthood, if you're already an ordained priest, or if you're a seminarian or even a bishop, God wants to make them whole, our shepherds whole. And so a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, that's really the starting point for a lot of the work that we build on and can really help a man become the leader he's called to be when we start looking at other aspects that tend to be below the surface sometimes.
So good. Love that. And how can people find it online? Do you have 2 separate websites for both businesses?
Yeah, I'd probably highlight the priest one, chrismpriest.com. That's a more robust site that really explains those different offerings, but you can email me at matt@chrismpriest.com if you want to know more, and I'd be happy to share about the work I do with for-profit leaders and business leaders as well.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, super thankful to know you and love the time we've had together as friends. And I look forward to growing even more together and to getting to know you better. Thank you so much for being here and for, just sharing all your brilliance and wisdom. In closing out, I want to give you the last word. I'm just curious, what final advice or encouragement you offered everyone listening, especially maybe people who may be thinking why is this worth it? Is it worth it to struggle and to go all this? Why don't I just kind of live that selfish life that we talked about?
Yeah, Joey, I guess all I can speak to is my own experience, and I'm on the journey towards wholeness. I'm not done, but I can taste it. I can feel it. And I feel more free than I did 6 months ago, a year ago. And it's taken a lot of work. It's taken a lot of self-awareness, painful self-awareness, and inviting other people in to help me grow in those areas, which is painful. It's really painful to recognize your own woundedness and brokenness, but it's also so much more free than trying to hide it. And I guess I would just encourage anyone that's struggling. It's if you're struggling to believe this, give it a try. And I think you'll find that there's so much more on the other side than just white knuckling it and trying to do it all on your own and pretend that it's okay on the outside. And God made us to need each other. He made us to need each other. We literally need each other. I think he describes the body of Christ. Right? Joey, you can't be the head and the heart and the foot and the arm and the ear and the nose and the eye. You can't be it all, right? And for a lot of my life, that's how I tried to be. Okay, I'm not an eye, but if I work hard enough, I can become an eye. It's no, maybe I'm just supposed to be, a mouth or an ear. And God made me to need those other parts. And so I think, just maybe to close it, I think that's kind of what wholeness is. It actually looks like this oneness in Christ, and we get to experience that through his body, the church. Right? When the body of Christ is thriving and doing well, I've had moments in my life and seasons in my life that gosh, things are so edifying and I'm so full by being in the presence of other people and they're speaking into my life and I'm coming to know myself and coming to know the Lord more fully. And I guess I would just encourage anyone that's wondering if it's worth it or wondering if this is possible, just take the first step, right? Take the first step by maybe inviting someone into your woundedness, your brokenness, or your fears. Maybe just take the first step in saying, you know what, maybe I'm not supposed to do this on my own. And start shedding some of that self-reliance and allow yourself to be broken, allowing yourself to be received, and allowing yourself to be loved. So that would be my encouragement. We're all on the journey. So brothers and sisters, I'm with you in it. And I need these reminders myself. So Joey, hold me accountable to that because I need that in my own life.
If you're a leader in a business, nonprofit, or even the church and you're tired of leading alone, or maybe you feel like your overall health as a person is just lacking, I definitely recommend at least reaching out to Matt to see how he can help you, especially for any priests listening right now, or maybe you know a priest who could use this. Matt's told me about the great work that he's doing with priests, seminarians, and even bishops, and it's incredible. It could honestly be the thing that you need to level up your leadership, and more importantly, just to become a healthier and more whole person leader. Again, go check out chrismpriest.com or reach out to Matt with the email that we'll put in the show notes for you guys. If you come from a divorced or broken family, or maybe you know someone who does, we offer more resources than just this podcast. Those resources include things like a book, free video courses, speaking engagements, a free assessment, online community, and so much more. And all of our content, all of our resources are designed to help you heal from the trauma that you've endured and build virtue so you can break the cycle and build a better life. And so if you want to view the resources that we offer for yourself or maybe someone that you know, just go to restoredministry.com/resources or just click on the link in the show notes. That wraps up this episode. If you know someone who's struggling because of their parents' divorce or broken family, share this podcast with them. Feel free to even do it now. Honestly, I promise you that they will be so grateful, even if they don't tell you right away. And in closing, always remember, you're not alone. We're here to help you feel whole again and break the cycle of dysfunction and divorce in your own life. And keep in mind the words of C.S. Lewis, who said, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending."